Hi everyone, to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today we're making baklava and I'm going to show you how to cut them in two different ways, either diamond shapes or into a big star-shaped baklava, which is a little more intricate and fancy, but I'm going to show you the easy way to do both. We're going to make a pistachio flavored baklava and a traditional Greek flavored baklava with almonds and walnuts, cinnamon and cloves, all those classic flavors. Let's get started. So every time we make a syrupy dessert, we start with the syrup because the pastry, when it comes out of the oven nice and hot, you want the syrup to have cooled down so that way it absorbs easily and also it stays nice and crispy. So we're going to start off with the syrup for the pistachio baklava. If you're making one kind, then by all means just double this recipe and then you can use the same thing. Well, if you might only be making one baklava, I'm making two. But that's another thing I wanted to say. If you're making baklava, make two because you can stick one in the freezer and you can have it on hand. If somebody comes over, you just put it in the oven and all your work is basically done. So I'm going to start with the syrup for the pistachio baklava, which is a little bit different from the walnut baklava. We're going to start off in a saucepan with 3 cups of granulated sugar, 2 cups of water, and I'll also squeeze the juice of half a lemon in it. Bring it to a boil. Once it comes to a boil and all of the syrup has dissolved, you can go ahead and take it off of the heat and add 1 cup of Greek honey in there, 2 tablespoons of rosewater. You can also use orange blossom water instead of the rose water. And I also like to add a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract for that nice floral note in there. Give it a nice stir and set it aside to cool completely. Now, the syrup for the walnut and almond baklava is pretty similar. You start off with 3 cups of granulated sugar, 2 cups of water, and squeeze the juice of half of a lemon in there. Once it comes to a boil and all of the sugar has dissolved, go ahead and take it off of the heat and add 1.5 cups of Greek honey in there, and that's it. You could also add a teaspoon of vanilla extract, but I just leave this plain. Set it aside so it can cool completely. You can transfer it into a bigger pitcher if you want, if you're in a hurry and you want this to cool completely, or you can do this step ahead of time and make it 2-3 days ahead and keep it in an airtight container in the refrigerator. Time to prepare the nuts. So for the pistachios, all I can find when it comes to peeled pistachios here are peeled, roasted, and salted pistachios. I love the saltiness of the pistachios with the sweet baklava, but you can get regular unsalted pistachios and use those instead. Use whatever you can find. And again, you can use as much as you like. I use about 3 or 4 cups of pistachios for the filling. I like to put the peeled pistachios in a food processor and I pulse it a few times until they're very finely chopped. You're not looking for powder, and if you take this too far, it'll turn into pistachio butter, so be careful. Transfer the pistachios into a bowl and set them aside. For the walnut and almond baklava, you're going to need 2 cups of walnuts and 2 cups of almonds. Go ahead and pulse those in a food processor. You can roast them if you want a little bit, maybe for 6 or 7 minutes to deepen their flavor, but they're going to roast for a long time in the oven, so just skip the roasting step. Just finely chop those as well and put them in a big bowl. And then go ahead and add 2 heaping teaspoons of ground cinnamon and half a teaspoon of ground cloves. I like to go heavy on the cinnamon because it's a very classic flavor. It's what you know baklava to taste like. It tastes very cinnamony. And then there's a hint of cloves in the background. If you go heavy on the cloves, it's going to taste bitter. So half a teaspoon is all you need. Mix that all up and set it aside. Now you have your fillings ready. You're going to want to make sure that you take out the phyllo ahead of time. I like to set it in the refrigerator overnight. And then in the morning, I take it out and I leave it in its packaging at room temperature so that way it's very easy to work with. You don't want to take phyllo out of the freezer and try to open up the package because it'll all be stuck together. You also don't want to stick it in the microwave because again, the steam will cause all of the layers to stick together. So do this with a little bit of preparation. Thaw it out overnight in the refrigerator and then just leave it on the counter for an hour or so. Now it's time to prepare the baklava. So we're going to begin with a diamond shaped baklava, and I have a 9 by 13 inch pan, a pound of number 4 phyllo. And what you want to do is cut the phyllo so that it can fit the inside of the pan and do that into 2 stacks. They don't have to be perfect. I have 3/4 of a pound of butter that's melted, and I'm just going to brush the bottom and the sides of the pan so that way the phyllo can stick. If one stack is bigger than the other, use the bigger stack for the bottom and the top layers. I'm going to put about 8 layers on the bottom, and I'm not buttering between the layers. You'll see why in a little bit. And then I'm going to take the nut mixture. I'll use the walnut and almond mixture for the diamond shaped baklava. And I'm going to sprinkle about a handful of the nut mixture over the phyllo. Then I'm going to layer 3 or 4 layers on top of that. And when you have about 7 or 8 layers of phyllo left, then you can put all the remaining nut mixture on the final top layer. Just spread them evenly, put all the rest on top. So to get a diamond shape, you need to go cut down halfway, all the way down to the bottom, then cut each half into a half again, like that. And you have 4 strips. Then you're going to start at the corner and you're going to slice down diagonally, and you can make them as big or as small as you like. So all older recipes, actually every single recipe that I've read or seen online calls for buttering the layers individually. Each time you lay a layer down in your tray, you should either drizzle or brush butter on top of it. And that's how we used to do it. That's how I learned it. That's how I did it. But if you don't know, we used to own a bakery for 10 years, a Greek bakery, and we made thousands of baklavas. And after a certain point, maybe after the 100th baklava, we tried pouring all of the butter on top in the end to save time. And guess what? The baklava tasted exactly the same as if it was buttered layer by layer. And that's a trick that I think I came up with. I never saw it online before I shared my video, and now I keep seeing it almost everywhere. With all the new baklava recipes, everybody's caught on to this trick, and it's so simple, saves you so much time, so make sure you use it. No need to butter each layer. Another little trick to keep the edges from burning is to have a little bit of water handy, and any tips of phyllo that are sticking up, you can kind of wet your fingers and just dampen the phyllo just a little bit. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the butter. Some recipes call for clarified butter. I just use 3 sticks of regular unsalted butter, and I either melt them in the microwave or on the stovetop until they are liquid, totally melted. Some recipes call for ghee or clarified butter. You can find that at the grocery store, or you can clarify butter yourself. Once you melt butter, you're going to notice that there's going to be a white sort of liquid in there. That's basically milk. It's milk solids. And what that does, once it bakes over the phyllo, it does tend to bake a little bit darker, and you're going to get dark spots on your phyllo. I don't mind that. I mean, it's perfectly fine with me. I've been making it for years and years this way, and no problem. But if you like a very clean looking, evenly golden baklava, then go ahead and use ghee for it or clarified butter. All you want to do is make sure that you lift all that golden liquid out and you discard the milky part, the white part. That's it. Just go ahead and continue layering the baklava now. Okay, so if you're making star-shaped baklava, you're gonna need a round pan. I have a 10-inch round baking pan here. It's 3 inches deep. And again, a pound of phyllo that's thawed and at room temperature. You don't have to cut it like I'm gonna cut it here. You can definitely lay it out just the way we do by layering it, extending over the sides of the pan like we do for a Greek custard pie or all the other pies that we've made. But cutting it into a round shape is just going to make layering much easier. You can take all the edges that are going to be left over and just layer them throughout the baklava. So using a sharp knife, just cut it into the same size of your pan. So you can layer these throughout the baklava, or you could save them for a limonopita or a portocalopita, lemon or an orange pie. So we're going to grease the bottom and the sides of the pan with a little bit of melted butter. I have 3 sticks of butter. This is unsalted butter that I've melted. It's 3/4 of a pound. And we're going to be making the star-shaped baklava pistachio flavored. So I like for the bottom phyllo layer to be the thickest. So I'm going to take about 6 to 8 layers. We're not buttering between the layers because we're going to use our trick. And I'll cut this into pieces so we can just layer this in between too. And then I have the ground pistachios. I'm just going to take 2 handfuls for the bottom. I like for there to be a thicker layer on the bottom. And then for the remaining layers, do 2 or 3 each time, except the top. You want the top to be nice and thick, so about 6 or 7 layers for the top. Just take these scraps and throw them in between. And then do a light, I wouldn't say a full handful, just a little bit to sprinkle on top of each layer. And the final layer of nuts should be, again, a nice thick layer. And then take the remaining phyllo sheets, put them on top. This is what's left over. I'm just going to put it in a little bag and refrigerate it. It'll stay fresh for like 4 or 5 days in the refrigerator. And now to get a star shape, you're going to cut this into 4 quarters. And then you're going to work with each quarter individually. So begin by slicing all the way down the center of the first quarter. And then make 2 more slices as even as you can get them. So that way you have 5 slices in each quadrant. Next, you're going to go down and you're going to cut down to the end right here. Just a straight line down this way and then a straight line down that way. And 1 more line down the center the same way. And you're just going to do the same thing in each quadrant. And at this point, the phyllo starts to dry up, so it is a good idea to drizzle some butter on top so that way it's easier to work with. Just a little bit, and we could drizzle the remaining butter in the end. And then just drizzle all the remaining butter on top of the baklava. So now at this point, if you have an extra tray of baklava prepared, you can wrap it tightly with plastic wrap. Of course, after you score it, make sure you score it. Otherwise, once it's frozen, it's going to be hard to cut it into shapes. But you wrap it tightly in plastic wrap, and this will keep fresh in your freezer for months, up to 2 months or so. Usually we have guests over quite often, so things don't last that long in my freezer, but I have heard that that's how long it stays fresh in your freezer. When you're ready to bake it, just thaw it overnight in the refrigerator and then bake it in the oven at 325 degrees Fahrenheit until it's nice and golden. My oven is already preheated to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. These are going to go in and they're going to bake for an hour and 20 or an hour and 25 minutes or until they're beautifully golden and crisp all around. It's nice to bake them at a lower temperature like 325 degrees rather than 350 or 375 because it keeps them nice and crisp. As soon as the baklava comes out of the oven, go ahead and pour the syrup on top. This is a big batch of syrup because we love our baklava extra syrupy. If you don't like it very syrupy and you're used to having a little bit of a drier baklava, I know in Middle Eastern bakeries, the baklavas are much drier than Greek baklava. Greek baklava is super syrupy, and at the bakery, we used to make it extra syrupy. So you can start pouring the syrup over the baklava as soon as it comes out of the oven. And once it's covered in syrup, you can just stop right there or pour the whole thing on top. Eventually, all of the syrup will absorb and there'll still be some left over when you're serving it. I'm going to leave it up to you. The leftover syrup can be stored in the refrigerator and you could use it on other desserts, or you can put it in smoothies or soak ladyfingers or cake in there. There's so many ways you can use this. It's not going to go to waste. Or you can use it all over your baklava. I'm going to leave it up to you. The hardest part of this whole thing is to wait now. You have to wait until all of the syrup has been absorbed and until the baklava cools to at least room temperature so that way it stays together once you go to serve it. So both baklavas have been cooling for not long enough, but I have to finish up this video and that's why I'm going to bite into them. Otherwise, it is best to let these sit for a bunch of hours, maybe 5-6 hours. So it is a good idea to make this overnight or in the evening and then let it sit at room temperature overnight so that way all of that syrup can absorb and you can serve it the right way. Of course, there's no wrong way to serve baklava because I like it. Even when it's falling apart and syrupy, I just think it's so delicious. This is a very rustic dessert. But if you want them to hold together and hold their shape, let it sit so that way all of the syrup can absorb and it can cool down and just be easier to serve basically. But you can serve it like this too. You can sprinkle some ground cinnamon on top of the walnut and almond baklava, and you can just leave the pistachio baklava as is. It doesn't need a topping. Time for the taste test. So it is a good idea to go in with a knife and reinforce the slices for the baklava. It should be very easy to just slice through. That way they come out easier. Time to take a little taste. Apistachio. Apistachio means unbelievable. This is unbelievably so delicious. I can't even explain to you. Honestly, this tastes better than a lot of the baklavas that I bought from bakeries. It's so fresh tasting. I love all that cinnamon, the warmth of the cloves. The nuts are perfectly toasted. The layers are so buttery and crisp. And that syrup is just perfectly sweet. So delicious. Let me try the pistachio one as well. Let's see which one's better. So good. I love the salty, crunchy pistachios. That rosewater really wakes it up. It makes it nice and light. So delicious. But if I had to choose, I go with the classic. I always go with the classics because it takes me back to my childhood. I love the walnuts and the cinnamon and the almonds. It's just so comforting to me. Anything that takes me back to childhood is super comforting to me. Although I do love the pistachio baklava too because I love pistachios. Let me know which one you guys prefer in the comment section down below. Let me know which one you're gonna make. And if you are making them, share pictures with me on Instagram or on Facebook, wherever you are. I love to see your recreations. I hope you guys give this recipe a try. Thank you guys so much for spending time with me today. I'll see you next time. Yes, us.